A sharp increase in anomalous activity has been reported in the Death Valley National Park. More specifically, the source seems to be the Devil's Hole cave system. The cave is unmapped and was thought at first to only be around 500 feet deep and completely filled with water. However, a recent discovery suggests that the cave may be thousands of meters deep, and only some of the caverns discovered were flooded. Natural physics suggests that all the caverns under the water source should be flooded as well. But for some reason, some of these caverns were empty and completely dry. Things came to a head when authorities noticed a recent uptick in missing people, both locals and tourists, traced to the Devil's Hole. At first, suspicions were that the people were getting lost. However, some of the individuals were locals that gave cave tours for a living. Another suspicion was inspired by the People of the Cavern myth. The People of the Cavern are rumored to be a small tribe of human-like beings, claimed by locals to be responsible for the cultist insignias that line the mountains of Death Valley. This could make sense, as these same insignias were found in newly discovered caverns in the Devil's Hole. However, these people are thought to be an old wives' tale, held and spread by locals, perhaps to attract more tourist revenue. Despite the accusation, many locals remain staunch in their stance that the cave people exist. To find the cause of these missing people, the Death Valley Police Department has contacted a professional cave mapper, Maxwell Brodenberg, to shed light on what exactly is happening in the cave. In the attempted completed mapping of the Devil's Hole, new evidence would come to light, leading to the dismissal of the People of the Cavern theory. While there was evidence of human habitation in many of the areas, there were no actual people seen, and there was no evidence that these were anything more than temporary homeless camps. As the mapper went deeper, he noted a smell of rot and decay that became stronger the further he voyaged into the cave. The deeper Maxwell went, the stranger that both the cave and the cultish insignias became. Maxwell noted that the layout of the cavern made no sense in a 3D space, often displaying impossible geometry. Some caverns that were thousands of feet deep would lead to spaces that were so close to the surface, one could see sunlight, and vice versa. Droplets shot upwards from stalagmites, creating puddles of water that collected on the ceiling as if gravity were reversed in only that spot. When he left that area and came back, it was flipped right side up. Sometimes he would walk from one cavern to another, only to be in the exact same room. Maxwell struggled to explain his findings to the authorities, but it helped that he had a digital camera and photographic evidence of many of the things that he claimed. After a week of mapping, he had made little progress in discovering the nature of the cave. On his 7th day exploring the cavern, Maxwell did not return. A search party was sent to find him after a few days. The search team was equipped with standard caving equipment, as well as a wired communication line directly to the surface team. While the physical line remained intact, communication from the search team went dark shortly after they were out of view. The search party reported similar anomalous happenings in the cave, and of the 5 members sent, only one returned. Even though communication was cut, the surviving member, Isaac Walters, claimed that he continued to converse with what he thought was the surface team throughout the expedition. He also claimed that the surface team gave some of his team members direct instruction to explore caverns in which they met their demise or disappeared. The only reason Isaac was able to find his way out of the cave was by following the phone cord. Isaac claimed to have found what he believes to be the remains of Maxwell Brodenberg. Isaac's report to authorities is as follows. There were only 2 of us left when I found the mapper, or what was left of him. His body looked deflated, like an old balloon, a juice pouch slurped dry, a deflated trash bag of a man that looked like his skin could be draped out like a yoga mat. When I approached his body, if you could even call it that, I saw that he had 2 large puncture wounds in his lower back, like someone had stuck metal pipes into him. His skeletal fingers, loosely adorned with skin, were wrapped around a digital camera. I took the camera and examined the contents. After doing so, I froze, not only because of what was on the camera, but because I had realized the body, and the only other remaining member of my team, were gone. The final photo taken on the digital camera is dated on the same day that Maxwell went missing. This is the photo. Holy guano! Some sort of anomalous cave system with unexplainable qualities that possibly contains a cult, but definitely contains a monster. Because the cave is utterly mind-bending, let's start simple and see what we can gauge about the spider. Evidently, this spider has intense photophobia, which means it's afraid of light and will react violently to any bright light source. If it wasn't planning on eating him already, that's probably why Maxwell ended up as some sort of used condom man. To find its prey, the creature has bioluminescent and photoreflective eyes. To be able to see in the cave, these eyes must be incredibly sensitive to all light, and this is likely the reason for the animal's photophobia in question. Like all spiders, this spider eats by locking the prey in place with its jaws, injecting a corrosive acid that dissolves the innards of the prey, and slurping the now jello-like insides out. The acid that it uses to dissolve the inside of its host reduces all but the bones to a slush, and for some reason, it leaves the skin intact as well. Another interesting thing, this spider's anatomy suggests that it actually may not be a spider at all. You see, this quote-unquote spider has a lot of features that look almost mammalian. For example, a typical spider foot looks like this. That was way cuter than I personally expected, and now I'm thinking about cute little spider paws. That's not what this guy has though, as his legs look like they end in some sort of horrible hand structure with clawed fingers. Looking closer at the beast, it's almost as if some of its features look not only mammalian, but distinctly human. The texture of its carapace resembles that of human skin closely, and if we look at this animal from a side view, we can tell that this spider's head has an almost human-like skull and jaw structure, almost as if this creature was once a man or a woman. Spider Monster is legally required not to discriminate. While the concept of a man spider seems impossible, we have to remember that a lot of the shit reported in the cave seems impossible. My theory is that this cave is for some reason an anomalous hotspot. I mean, come on, it's named the Devil's Hole. It's not that far off. That preternatural beings and happenings are either attracted to or formed by this cave. This would explain the phenomena and layout within the cave, the myths of the strange cult spread by locals, and the spider being as well. The spider creature could be the remains of what used to be a missing person, somehow mangled by the cave into an otherworldly arachnid appearance. It could also be some sort of local fauna that evolved within the cave itself. If the rules of geometry and physics are different in the cave, it's possible that the laws of biology and evolution are different as well. This suggests that it's possible that this being evolved within the cave to hunt humans who became lost and trapped due to its confounding nature. A novel species of anomalous entity has recently been found living in the bowels of the underbelly. This creature, hereby known as the Corpse King, is a compound organism made up of multiple different human beings and a larva-like entity. However, the true Corpse King is not actually the combination of human bodies you see before you, but instead, a massive parasite lurking within the unholy chimera's bowels. The underbelly is a liminal space dimension consisting of subterranean structures like catacombs, sewers, and subways that people can find themselves trapped in by exploring a bit too deeply underground and getting lost. While most don't notice that they've left Earth right away, they begin to understand the gravity of their situation when they find out the side effects of tapeworms down here. This creature starts as many life forms do. The noble egg. This egg hatches after a few days, and the worms proceed with their first stage of life, the aquatic stage. In this stage, the worms live in the water and feed on detritus, waste products, and other small life forms in the underbelly, until it grows from microscopic to a few centimeters long. From here, the parasite stops eating and waits for a human wanderer to enter the water. Upon detection of a human being, the Corpse King will rapidly swim towards the person and attempt to enter through any orifice or open wound submerged in the water. Because the person isn't usually in the shit water on purpose, these entrances are typically below the waist, so they often enter up through the poo or pee holes. Nature is just so beautiful sometimes. I mean, not right now. This makes me think we should upgrade and start putting macroplastics in the ocean, but I don't know, man. Eat some sticks. In the second stage of the Corpse King life cycle, it acts like an especially fearsome tapeworm. After the parasite enters the host, it will attach itself to the outer lining of the intestine and begin leaching nutrients from any pre-digested food that the wanderer consumes, as well as the host itself. It will continue to feed and grow until it's around 3 feet in length. At this point, the victim has a noticeable distended potbelly that squirms in an unnerving fashion. The host doesn't seem to mind this though, nor do they any of the grotesque gastrointestinal symptoms related with the parasite, as the worm releases hormones that tell the human brain that it is in utter bliss. and it loves the fact that it always has diarrhea. This psychological hold is so severe that humans have even been recorded expressing affection towards the worm and protecting it from harm.
I mean, it was cool when you were just into worms, but now I feel like it's your whole personality.
Oh, I see the problem. You misunderstand. The worms are working their way into me.
After the worm cements its psychological hold over the host, the parasite will again cease feeding and growing momentarily, while it manipulates its host to seek out another wanderer. The corpse king can't reach the final stage of its life cycle until it finds one more person. When it finally does cross paths with an unlucky individual, the worm springs from the original host's mouth and latches onto the face of the second person. It burrows into the eye and targets the brainstem. Within a matter of minutes, the second host is completely paralyzed, but still alive. After this, the worm exits the second host and slithers back into the original. They drag off the corpse of the second victim into a dark, damp place. At this point, the host lays on top of the dead body, and the worm exits the shell of a person. It produces a thick, stringy silk, not cum, that it uses to encompass both itself and the two corpses. It will remain in this cocoon for 1 month, until they emerge as a full-grown corpse king.
They grow up so fast.
A fully grown corpse king adult is the unholy amalgamation of 3 beings. The new form keeps much of the external anatomy of the two people the same, with some key differing features. For one, the new chest cavities have burst in several places, where the intestines of the creature leak out. The parasite is so large that it pushes the internal organs out of the body to make room for itself. These intestines are part of the worm itself, as they fused during the metamorphosis. Pro tip, if you need to kill it, stab the wiggly bits. Much of its biomass has been reallocated to the support torso. As you can see, its fingers and toes are much hardier than that of a traditional Homo sapien. And if you see its arms and legs, they definitely deserve a goddamn.
Where's the drawing from the back?
The creature took most of this biomass from the top torso during its metamorphosis, and has modified what remained of it into a contorted set of armed jaws. At the top of these jaws lies the skulls of both amalgamated individuals. As an adult, the Corpse King acts as a scavenger and predator to many life forms in the underbelly. Most of the horrific things about this monster are how it gets to become a monster, not what it actually does after. At this stage, it's really no different than a bipedal lion or a land shark, just a big old predator, like Jared. This era of its life is the reproductive stage, and it will consume biomass to be converted into eggs. It will continue to do this until it dies, whether that be by starvation, gunshot, or AIDS because it's in the sewer. And they all lived happily ever after, unless they were one of those 2 people who got amalgamated, or literally anyone else but the worm. The end. A collection of mysterious fossils was recently discovered in the mountains of Death Valley National Park. These fossils appear to depict a group of creatures belonging to a species which has no known ancestors in Earth's tree of life. At first, the researchers at the corporation studying the various phenomena taking place in Death Valley, Luci Corp, believed it to be from an extinct family of prehistoric aquatic creatures. This would make sense, as the desert of Death Valley was underwater in the Paleozoic period, some tens of millions of years ago. Hence, many ocean fossils have been discovered in this region. On the suspicion that they had found something unique, Luci Corp sent a sample of these fossils to be carbon dated and further analyzed. The study into the nature of these remains would tell an unexpected story. The bones were arranged in a manner that didn't correspond to any known classification in the planet's biological history. It looked as if someone tried to recreate a vertebrate version of an octopus. The skeleton itself resembled a sea spider, but with a few more extra, more malicious-looking pieces. The creature had 8 long limbs, each made up of many small segments. The base of the animal looked like 8 human spines, all sutured together at a center locus. Some of them had limbs that would split into 2 more further down the arm. These legs looked as if they could move in any orientation. At the top of the skeleton lies a bulb-shaped skull with a 4-pronged set of jaws holding multiple rows of razor-sharp teeth. At the corner of each lip was a forward-facing eye socket, further indicative of a predatory feeding pattern. Also notable about this skull, it had a much larger allocation for the brain than any other animal of its size at the time, suggesting a higher brain-to-body mass intelligence quotient. Strangely, even though this fossil was found in a region known for paleoaquatic life, it had many of the telltale signs of an animal that walked on land. Even stranger, it showed a bone structure capable of suspensory movement. like some species of primate. It didn't seem to have many useful ways of propelling itself underwater either, and the structures it did have looked more like taloned versions of apes' hand feet rather than fins. When the fossil's lab data came back, it revealed that these animals existed quite recently, as the carbon in their bones dated back only a few hundred years. Whatever these things were, they weren't ancient. Not only this, but results from other tests showed that this stone was in fact much more similar to stone found in a nearby cave system than that of the mountain. Despite the area in which the fossils were found and the weathered appearance of the remains, the overwhelming evidence pointed to the collection of skeletons coming from a modern creature possibly still alive within the Devil's Hole cave system. This cave system was already known to display several qualities that seemed to confound modern science, including shifting layout and geology, aberrations in the laws of physics and biology, and several strange, even anomalous creatures that make up an ecosystem straight out of H.P. Lovecraft's wet dreams. Luci Corp, fascinated at the prospect of a novel creature living only within the cave system, sent a team of 2 people into the cave in order to investigate this creature and try to capture a living specimen for exhibition display. 1 professional cave mapper, Matthew Brodson, and 1 doctorate revokee / self-proclaimed cryptozoologist, Maria James. They were given a dossier filled with all known dangers within the cavern, a standard issue spelunking kit, a week's worth of food rations, and 1 camera each. They were instructed to avoid anything that did not fit the description of the animal that the skeleton belonged to. The 2 entered the cave, and within 2 hours, only the cryptozoologist emerged, looking like she had been through intense trauma. Even though Maria had only been in the cave for a little over 100 minutes, she claimed that they had been in there for several days, and her physical state reflected this. Not only this, but she claimed that throughout her time in the cave, she and her team member were being stalked by an incredibly intelligent subterranean predator. The very same animal they were sent in to capture. One that not only used its intelligence to pursue them and successfully capture and consume the cave mapper, but also to torment Maria and let her escape, seemingly all for its own entertainment. Maria's recollection of the time is as follows. As we started making our way deeper into the cave, we noticed these weird little piss-bile yellow-colored spotlights, if you could call them that, would sometimes be pointed at our backs, only when we weren't looking. As we turned around, there was no source to the light. This one time I thought I saw where it came from just before it dimmed, but when I shined my flashlight at it, I saw what looked like any other big lumpy rock. I moved my flashlight away for just a second and heard a frantic scuttling, moved it back, and the rock was gone. I had read in the dossier that the cave could shift. I just chalked it up to that. We tried to ignore it, but we had the sense that we were being watched. These incidents would be relatively few and far between in the first few days, but it happened enough to seriously unsettle us. Brodson went ahead to check the next cavern for hazards, and he turned around to give me the signal for an all clear. I noticed his entire back was dimly lit. I told him this, and upon turning around, the spotlight focused on his neck. Something jumped from the darkness and pulled him inside the next room. I ran back to the last room, and this time, the cave actually did shift. In an instant, his screams were silenced and there was only a single passage forward in front of me. I walked forward for days on end. Every time I would turn around, that same disgusting yellow light would flash like a strobe light behind me. It was overwhelmingly bright, blinding me for split-second spans. In between the strobes, there was a background light it generated. I could see it. It was eating Brodson. It had already finished his head and was working its way down the shoulders. It made this horrible, quick chittering noise, like the call of a cicada mixed with psychopathic laughter. Each of its soulless, dead eyes locked with mine, and it looked like it was proud of itself, relishing my fear. I don't know why it didn't just kill me. I never wanted to turn around, but I kept doing it. Each time it showed off how much it managed to work its way down what was left of Brodson. I collapsed from exhaustion a few times, and I would awaken to that horrible laugh inches from my face, waking me up in a panic, scrambling to my feet and sprinting forward with everything I had. This one time, I woke up to the tip of Brodson's severed finger that it had placed in my mouth. I shrieked and wove around to see he was completely gone. That thing had finished him. In between blinding flashes, I saw the creature's blood-stained lips laughing its mocking screech, and one of its limbs pointed at me. like it was telling me I was next. That sadistic fuck was toying with me. It was in the last of these terrifying wake-up calls that I managed to burst from the mouth of the cave. I thought I was going deeper, but I guess not. I don't know what that thing was, and I don't give a fuck. For all I care, we should just nuke that fucking cave. Nuke the fucking cave? That's just what Shoggoth says when she waxes her— It appears that the mysteries within the Devil's Hole cave system only deepen. A novel anomalous creature, unlike anything seen before, has been discovered in this cavern. First, in the forms of a couple spooky skeletons that Luci Corp thought were really old, except they turned out to be not that. Since these creatures were seemingly so alien in nature, it was almost impossible to determine what these things were before they voyaged into the cave. But I'm pretty sure Luci Corp knew they weren't friendly when they threw those two innocent people at it. When living, these creatures closely resemble octopi, except with many more bony bits, and four-pronged heads that can rotate to any orientation on their legs. Strangely enough, these animals share quite a lot with octopi biologically. For example, like the noble octopus, crawlers have 3 hearts, smell and taste mostly through sensory organs in their arms, and display incredible intelligence, even compared to humans. I mean, I saw a person eat a handful of sand yesterday, so humans are a low bar, but still pretty cool. They have short and long-term memory, express curiosity and exhibit play behaviors, and have also been observed tormenting prey items. I guess intelligence really has the wholesome and horrible as 2 sides of the same coin, huh? These creatures also display a highly advanced form of camouflage shared with octopi. They have chromatophores to change color with the rock texture and lighting so that they can sneak up on prey items like humans and cavern people. Not only this, but they also have organs on their skin called papillae, which are raised portions of the skin that the cave crawler can use to change the texture of its skin to match the sections of stone behind it. The combination of these two allows for almost indetectable camouflage, especially when hunting creatures that aren't used to the lighting conditions of the cave. You know, like you. This animal displays a unique method of limb regeneration. The cave mapper, while trying to save his own life, discovered this creature's Hydra effect after he sliced off the tip of one of its limbs with a pocket knife. 2 words you never want to hear in the same sentence: impromptu and circumcision. Footage of his body cam as he was being slowly eaten alive showed that this creature would regenerate 2 limbs in place of the one severed. This would explain the seemingly random amount of limbs displayed on some of the fossilized skeletons. Also notable is the cave crawler's incredible mastery of bioluminescence. With a bioluminescent organ in the back of its throat, it's capable of a multitude of impressive light tricks. For instance, it can use this to communicate with other crawlers, to disorient and track its prey, and even to make shadow puppets. Now do a dog. She's so talented. Yeah, it's a she. Stop asking to see it, you fucking pervs. These creatures are highly individualistic, and only congregate for the purposes of sexy times and cannibalizing each other. Sometimes one will lead to the other, but I think that's just a weird kink thing for some of them rather than a mating ritual, because they don't do it across the board. Only the really pervy ones. Speaking of what they eat, these animals have been seen feeding on humans, the cavern people, and even some of the larger and more dangerous anomalous animals within the cave. If there is an apex predator for this ecosystem, thus far, the crawler has the top spot. Also because I really haven't seen anything else eat it. I'm going to eat it. This is what it would look like if I made it in Spore. I like Spore. What? The land octopus? Giant half-man spider? How could they possibly think that? It's not like they're at all missing the point about this being a fucking cartoon. The underbelly. An ecosystem of forever expanding pipes and tunnels that belong to the underground systems that keep society functioning. Sewers, subways, catacombs, anything constructed to facilitate the incessant function or store the forgotten waste of the cities that bustle above it. The entrance to the underbelly isn't easily found. In fact, most of those who find themselves there do so by accident. One only gets there by exploring a bit too deeply in an underground structure and getting lost. It takes a while before most realize they're more than just lost, and they've actually stumbled into an entirely new realm. Some never realize that they've been trapped in a dank liminal hell. A clear, unignorable sign that you've transitioned into the underbelly is that the architecture of the underground structure you're walking through will become less consistent, almost random, and you'll notice that there's much more than the usual sewer rats and roaches running around. One of these creatures, the one we're taking a look at today, is called the meat crab. Not those kind of meat crabs. Put your condom away. Not that you'd even use it. Meat crabs are scavengers and low-level predators. They live in complex hive systems that closely mimic those of earthen ants. The meat crabs make their homes in the walls of the underground structures that make up the underbelly. They burrow a complex tunnel system that acts as their home, food storage, nursery, and brothel. See, if they were people and they did all that crap in one room, they'd be rightfully in jail. But they're just big old dumb meat crabs and they don't know no better. Also, like hive-mind insects or religious white people, they have a complex and rigid social structure. Among the meat crabs, there is one queen meat crab, which is kinda weird because with a name like meat crab, you'd think they'd have a king. The queen gives birth to all of the meat crabs in the hive. Males have a short lifespan and only exist to breed with the queen. God, wouldn't that be nice and simple? Short and sweet.
Nut and bolt straight to the grave, am I right?
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Weird thing about that is that they're both husband and son in that relationship, but we've already established that these crabs are degenerate, so whatever. Any females that do not find themselves as queen are sterile workers, gathering the food and taking care of the colony with everything they have until they take their last breath. Or however the fuck meat crabs breathe. These are the only meat crabs that can be seen outside of the hive, as they go out on expeditions to gather biological material to be turned into meat crab nectar. The hive survives solely off of this nectar, and it can be made out of basically anything that was once living, or came out of something that was once living. Fun fact, meat crabs recycle their dead into nectar too.
Nature is just so beautiful sometimes. I mean, not right now. This makes me want to coat the Great Barrier Reef in a thick layer of plastic, but I don't know, stick it in a fish's mouth or something.
The nectar has a brownish-green hue, and its consistency is said to be between that of bone marrow and gelatin. The taste is described as a combination of artichokes, pork, and manure. While this substance has no known analogs on the surface, the closest thing found that resembles its chemical makeup is the Impossible Meat Burger King Whopper. These creatures feed indiscriminately on biological matter. Flesh, plants, excrement, bone, basically anything. These things are little living garbage disposals, I tell ya. They not only gather refuse to create the nectar they so crave, but also actively hunt anything they can find for it as well. Meat crabs are only dangerous to human wanderers in large numbers. However, that doesn't mean you're safe if you only see one. It's actually just the opposite. It's a sign of encroaching danger. You should immediately move far away from your current location in the opposite direction of the meat crab, as they will be back in far greater numbers. Upon seeing a potential prey item, the meat crab will scuttle back to the hive and leave a trail of pheromones to where it saw the prey. If the prey item is still there when the meat crabs return, this time in the hundreds to thousands, the prey, in this case you, can consider yourself meat crab nectar. The meat crabs can attribute their hyper-organized nature to a pheromonal system of communication. Yes, the scrutinous digging of the tunnels, the militaristic blitzkrieg crab strategy, and even the meticulously arranged social order can all be attributed to the specific and communicative smells that come out of their asses. I can relate, because if I like someone enough, I'll do basically anything for her to let me smell her ass. You know, I can't tell if I'm writing this script on too many drugs, or not enough. Just the right amount. The Bureau of Anomalous Containment recently discovered both the underbelly and the meat crabs from several pages that look as though they've been torn from a notebook. The paper was weathered, stained, and torn in several places. The following is what was written on the pages. At this point, I've given up. I've been wandering for hours now, and the tunnels all look the same. I was marking landmarks to try to keep track, but I've seen the same places several times, and each time the marks I make disappear. I knew the area of the sewer just before I began to lose track of my surroundings quite well. When I was homeless, I lived in a pipeline nearby it, but at some point while journeying back towards the surface, I slipped into a hole and found myself in a tunnel I had never seen before. It was dimly lit by an unplaceable light that looked like it came from a flickering bulb, but I couldn't find the source. It was like the ceiling was glowing. At first, I was just perplexed, curious about the new area I had found myself in. I thought I knew this city's underground like the back of my hand. I was naively excited about the new tunnel that only I knew about. A little haven, all of my own. safe from the other scavengers. I just kept wandering. Wasn't really sure what else to do. Everything just looked like more of the same until I saw this one small bug thing. It kind of looked like a tick, but with flesh and skin rather than an exoskeleton. It had 2 front arms, like a crab too. I didn't think much of it. It seemed like it was scared off by my mere presence and scuttled back into the darkness. I thought that was going to be the last of that and kept moving. Sometime later, I heard the rapid pitter-patter of a million footsteps distantly down the hallway. It got closer and closer until I saw a wave of those little meaty spider crabs coming towards me at full speed. I was able to cut around a corner and lock myself behind a heavy industrial door to avoid getting trampled, but they're still out there. I can hear them. I know they're looking for me. The pages were found at the mouth of an exit pipe for a wastewater treatment plant. The stains from the paper were analyzed and contained traces of human feces from several people, the blood of a single individual that according to DNA testing was not in the Bureau's system, and a peculiar novel substance with an earthy, meaty scent. Later testing suggested to the Bureau that this was a splotch of meat crab nectar. Not only that, but the DNA of the blood matched the DNA of the nectar, suggesting that the wanderer who wrote these pages was processed into food for the hive. And they all lived happily ever after, unless they happened to not want to be processed into nectar for the hive. The Devil's Hole cave system in Death Valley National Park has become a locus for supernatural phenomena. After a troubling pattern of disappearances in and around the cavern, authorities began sending investigators into its depths. Some had successful expeditions, but in the end, those who sought to map the cave only joined the numbers of those it claimed. On the occasions that the explorers did return, they always described monsters and hazards of an indescribable nature. Which I always thought was kind of weird, because, if you're describing them as indescribable, then they've just been described. Wait, indescribable is a description in the first place, so the word just makes no sense. I'm getting off track. Among the oddities found within the caverns, one room in the cave proved especially confounding. Dubbed Medusa's Den, this room was found by investigator Mark Fischbach. No relation, but we're gonna use his picture. Please don't sue me. Upon returning from his first expedition, investigator Fischbach provided evidence of a massive cavern within the cave, containing what at first appeared to be limestone statues of people in incredible pain. The faces of the statues suggest that they're screaming in agony, like they were given birth to spiny sea urchins. Strangely enough, the statues were wearing cloth clothes as well, and had completed anatomy under them. The clothes that these statues were wearing were from various eras of history. Some looked like they were from the days of cavemen. Some looked like prospectors trying to strike it rich during the gold rush. Some looked like they went missing this week, right down to the fresh Heinz mustard stains on their quadruple XL Supreme shirts. There were also statues of small animals like rats, frogs, and scorpions. Even stranger, occasionally he noted statues of spiders as tall as his waist, one of a humanoid creature that definitely wasn't stolen directly from the descent, even one of some sort of giant predatory land cephalopod. I really like what you've done with the place, Mommy Cave. He returned from the cave on his first expedition with no struggle or fear. However, he looked notably paler than when he went in, but it wasn't like he had seen a ghost. He relayed all information very matter-of-factly, and did not resist at all when Luci Corp assigned him to return to the cave the next day. This wasn't the classic psychological reaction of blood draining from someone's face due to fear. Upon shaking a Luci Corp executive's hand, they stated that it was almost like the texture and hue of the skin was changing. It was gray and hard. It felt like dusty sandpaper. The next day, Fischbach undertook his second expedition. The first time he went in, he said that it took him at least an hour of exploring deep within the cave before he came across the room. The second time, he said he found it almost immediately, and to his surprise, it was far closer to the surface than the first time. Not only this, but the room appeared much larger. There were many more statues, and they were arranged in a circle, all pointed towards a central locus. Fischbach noted that among the statues, many of them resembled the tourist that had recently gone missing. He came and went from the cave with no issue. Even though he reported being inside for only a few hours, he left for the expedition at the crack of dawn and returned at midnight. The second time Fischbach returned, his epidermis looked more similar to the skin of an elephant than that of a man. It was dry, hard, and flaky, and it audibly shifted and cracked as he moved. Fischbach had not noticed this until informed of his condition by those he was debriefing. Upon becoming aware of his state, he panicked and begged the Luci Corp executives to seek out the source of a potential cure. Originally, both Fischbach and representatives of Luci Corp agreed that this was clearly emblematic of the Greek myth of Medusa, hence the name they chose for the cavern. Samples taken from Fischbach's rapidly changing skin revealed a different cause for this anomalous disease. It appears that this affliction is caused by a newly discovered species of fungus native to the Devil's Hole, hereby dubbed Gorgon spores. These spores cause the calcification of biological material when in contact with a living animal. Translation, they turn meaty bits into rocks. When touched, eaten, or inhaled, these spores will bind to organs and tissues and calcify them into limestone. You're probably wondering, what's the fucking point of turning people into rocks? Just for funsies? Well, it's not just for funsies. It's actually integral in how these Gorgon spores feed. You see, these spores are an extremophile species of fungus that feeds on limestone deposits within the cave. However, just like Hansel and Gretel learned, if you eat your house, the maintenance costs are gonna be crazy, and that's why you gotta stick more candy all over the walls. And by candy, I mean dead people turn into rocks. Hence why these spores convert animals into limestone. It's 'cause they're hungry. Through a heretofore unknown process, the Gorgon spores first calcify their victims, and then use a specialized acid to dissolve the calcified rock, allowing metals and inorganic ions present in the newly formed stone to be used as the fungus's energy source.
Nature is just so beautiful sometimes. I mean, not right now. This makes me want to light a hornet's nest on fire and throw it in a school, but I don't know, man. Eat a random mushroom from the forest.
It's thought that the Gorgon spores are at least partially the reason that the cave can shift and morph so fluidly, as the constant influx of new limestone from this cavern could be used to restructure the cave, as the fungus constantly breaks it down and feeds on it. I got that last part from the Luci Corp files that I didn't steal, but for once the humans look like they're onto something, so credit where credit is due. Evidently, the spores are not limited to Medusa's den, but can travel with any host that's been infected. Fischbach continued to calcify even when he was kept on the surface, showing evidence that the cave spores will continue to feed off of their prey, even when outside of their native environment. He begged to be sent back into the cave in search of a cure, and Luci Corp readily agreed to send him back next morning. Upon daybreak, Investigator Fischbach had become completely calcified, his face stricken with the same excruciating expression as those claimed by Medusa's den. Luci Corp has gone on record stating that it intends to use his body to explain the natural process of how the Gorgon spores fucking eat people to fat tourists. They're quoted on record as saying, "Investigator Fischbach's sacrifice will not be in vain, as his remains will educate those who will inevitably come from every corner of the earth to experience the majesty of the Devil's Hole anomalies." A novel species of anomalous entity has recently been reported in the underbelly. This creature has features that closely resemble those of several species of rodents, as well as some that strangely resemble those of millipedes. This animal, hereby dubbed the molepede, was found tunneling throughout the underbelly on an exploration mission by the Bureau of Anomalous Containment. The underbelly is an infinite liminal dimension made up of underground structures like sewers, subways, and catacombs that has many connections to Earth via the non-anomalous versions of those places. People often find themselves transported there by exploring a bit too deeply underground and losing track of where they are. While they won't notice right away, they may figure it out once they see this place's version of a rat. To get a better understanding of this creature, we should first take a look at its physiology and biology. This animal will grow to be 7 to 15 feet long as an adult, and the amount of legs that it has is directly tied to the length of its spine, sprouting more weird stubby rat feet as it grows throughout its life.
They grow up so fast.
In a traditional sense, the molepede is functionally blind. While it does use those eyes for a certain type of sight, it's not a traditional sense of vision. The molepede instead uses this weird little wormy star-shaped nose to find its way around. This organ paints a picture of the world with a combination of scent and touch. The wormy feely-dealies are 100 times more sensitive than human fingertips, and the olfactory system is magnitudes stronger than a human nose. These two senses allow the molepede to paint an accurate picture of the world, so it's not just sitting there doing whatever the fuck Helen Keller did all day, which was probably nothing. While I did say this creature was functionally blind, that was a lie. Well, kind of. If you put this thing on the surface, it would definitely need a service dog, don't get me wrong. But that's oversimplifying it.
You may be wondering why this animal has 4 eyes rather than 2 when it should have 0 because it can't fucking see. While the molepede cannot see in a traditional sense, they still have 2 sets of eyes focused on different spectrums of light. The top set of eyes can see infrared, and the molepede uses these to detect sources of intense heat from behind the walls of the underbelly to more easily find meat crab nests. The animal's bottom set of eyes are tuned to the X-ray spectrum. Remember that scene from Predator where, to hide from Predator, they put a bunch of mud on themselves to disguise their heat signature? Well, even if you hid your heat signature, this guy could still see your skeleton. This allows the molepede to hunt for warm-blooded animals as efficiently as cold-blooded ones. Even though these modes of sight are not nearly as useful for painting a picture of the environment itself, they are especially tailored to find the exact resources the molepede needs more efficiently than regular eyes would in this dark environment. This creature spends the majority of its time burrowing tunnels into concrete that make up the underbelly, using their large star noses to detect food sources. They have large incisors tough enough to scrape through solid stone located on the cusp of their lips, which means they can dig through the walls without eating a bunch of rocks. It's pretty good, I don't like these rocks. Because of their large size, these tunnels are often disruptive to other life forms in the underbelly. The tunnel systems they create are often responsible for making the architecture in the areas they inhabit unstable, resulting in constant collapses. Because the collapses create areas cut off from most of the other underbelly, it is in these collapsed areas that molepedes find a safe place to reproduce and rear their young. Strangely, while these creatures are warm-blooded mammals, like part of their namesake, the millipede, they lay large clutches of soft-shelled eggs, and their blood contains a lethal poison. Molepedes lay clutches of up to 30 eggs at a time, and they usually do it in one of the naturally occurring shit piles in the underbelly. The eggs are around the size of a baseball, but taste much better than one. The newly hatched molepede is only a few inches in length. However, the babies will scurry off and quickly grow to their full size in around 2 to 3 years. Like the majority of the life in the underbelly, to survive, this creature has to eat whatever it can find. However, unlike most of the life down here, it doesn't seem to directly target human wanderers. I mean, if it's starving and you look slow and stupid, don't get me wrong, it'll take a bite. But like most members of the opposite sex, it probably won't pursue you. These creatures are omnivores, mostly consuming refuse and the various species of fungus that occur in the underbelly. They do, however, supplement their diet with whatever meat they can safely catch. And in addition to this, they do have one favorite, dangerous treat to acquire. These creatures are the main predator of meat crabs, and will crack open and destroy their hives for the nectar they create. Kinda like a bear getting in a beehive for the honey, or an anteater getting in an anthill for the ants, or your uncle getting in your ass for a felony. While meat crabs are fearsome in their own right, since the molepede has toxic blood and flesh, the crabs die off as they attack it. Because of this, it takes a lot longer for the meat crabs to do significant damage to the molepede, giving it a healthy feeding window to slurp up all the nectar and munch on some crabs. And they all lived happily ever after, unless they happen to be a meat crab. The end.
The Death Valley National Park has become home to what at first appeared to be cult activities. These phenomena are centered around the Devil's Hole cave system. The cave is unmapped and was only thought at first to be around 500 feet deep. Recent discoveries suggest that the cave may be thousands of feet deep and displays numerous anomalous qualities. After a series of disappearances in and around the cavern, the Death Valley Police Department sent an investigator to map the cave. Before his passing, the investigator discovered, among other phenomena, that the laws of physics can function differently within the cavern. Not only this, but the layout of the cave is rumored to morph and change, trapping any occupants in an ever-shifting limestone maze, evidently inhabited by dangerous and otherworldly fauna. The disappearances didn't cease following the discovery of the nature of the Devil's Hole. In fact, they seemed to increase. Not only this, but the seemingly paranormal nature of the disappearances attracted a crowd of what called themselves supernatural tourists. Curious as to the anomalous nature of the cave, these tourists flocked from all over to get a chance to see it for themselves. Despite knowing full well of the dangers of the cave, the locals seek to profit off this. However, with the cave closed to any individual not involved in the investigation or law enforcement, this would prove difficult. In attempts to monetize the confounding nature of the Devil's Hole, an independent contracting company, Luci Corp, approached the Death Valley Police Department and proposed a deal. If Luci Corp were to completely fund and undertake all facets of the cavern investigation, they would be able to access the grounds on whatever basis they would like. This would allow the Death Valley PD to focus their limited resources on their police work rather than ghost busting, as Luci Corp put it. The Death Valley Police Department, already stretched thin and unprepared when it comes to handling non-anomalous phenomena, reluctantly agreed to hand over the entire operation to Luci Corp. Luci Corp organized their first expedition into the cave the same day that they began planning infrastructure for tourism endeavors. Richard Gray was the first investigator hired by Luci Corp to explore the cave. He was given a corded expedition phone, a digital camera, and a hazmat suit. Mr. Gray was in the cave for several days. Upon exiting the Devil's Hole, Mr. Gray had been stripped of his hazmat suit and the rest of his clothes. He looked incredibly pale and was in severe distress. He had no knowledge of why he was naked. He was also seemingly surprised that he was naked in the first place. Mr. Gray's report of his time in the Devil's Hole is as follows. When I first entered the cavern, it looked like any other flooded cave. As I turned back to face the surface, the light that had previously illuminated my back dissipated, and I was facing a solid rock wall. I turned back around to reveal a circular room, lit by a fire in the middle. The cord to the phone was now outstretched in front of me, leading me further into the cave. The walls were lined with what looked like a deep red mix of cave paintings and cultish iconography. It looked somehow both meticulously painted in some parts and splattered with reckless abandon in others. I followed the phone cord and cultish symbols into another room, then another, then another. I lost track after the 12th or 13th. They all looked the same. Upon getting deeper into the cave, I heard screaming, desperate screams for help. This wasn't all I heard. There were also a series of violent, cacophonous clicking noises. I turned back to go in the other direction, but the cave cut me off again. I had no choice. The horrible chorus got louder as I followed it. The symbols and the cord to another room yet again illuminated with fire. It's almost as if the cave were leading me to witness this. I saw a group of what I could only describe as bat people, things, whatever, drag a tourist that had been reported missing several days ago onto a carved slab of stone. He must have been 300 pounds, but one of them picked him up and threw him on the slab like he was nothing. They pulled out a blade and cut him from his neck to his crotch. Then they began to eat the vital organs, heart, kidneys, liver, and intestines. They finished their meal by scalping him, cracking his skull like a coconut, and eating the brain. Then they split his legs and arms down the middle, cracking the bones and pulling them to make it look like he had 8 limbs rather than 4. I almost puked at the sight of it, and I couldn't take it anymore. I followed the phone cord past it as silently as I could, but I accidentally kicked a small pebble. All of them swerved around and stared directly at me. They instantly burst into a sprint and repeated their grating clicking noises as fast as a machine gun. I snapped a picture, and they seemed to hate the flash. They stopped momentarily, screeching in pain. I used the opportunity to slip through a crack in the wall, and the second I was out of that room, there was only a solid rock wall behind me. No monsters. I followed the cord back to the surface, and nothing weird happened on the way out. It's almost like the cave wanted me to get out. Please don't make me go back down there. Mr. Gray was sent back to the cave a few days after his initial report. He went missing on his second expedition. The next day, Luci Corp hired another investigator. As the bodies piled up, it would soon become clear that the way Luci Corp saw it, as long as they could keep finding investigators to sacrifice to the cave, they could keep their potential tourist business feasible. It appears that the anomalous Devil's Hole cave system has a whole cult of wild and wacky monstrosities living inside of it. I wonder if someone's gonna go on to explain what exactly these weird cave people are. Probably not, though. The cavern people have incredibly pale, almost bony skin. The texture of their skin is described as an entire body callus. They also have large, blacked-out photoreflective eyes. These creatures are violently photophobic, similar to the cave spider from the previous entry. They have rat-like face whiskers for sensing the environment, and disproportionately large triangular ears to hear things real good. The cave people also have fishhook-shaped claws on the ends of their fingers and toes for multiple reasons. None of them are sexual, I promise. One reason is for use in hunting and killing. Another is for use in fishing the incredibly endangered fish that live in the waters of only the Devil's Hole. And yet another is for use in scaling the walls and ceilings of the cave. The teeth of the cave people resemble those of a crocodilian, likely having something to do with their fish-heavy diet and the need to quickly skewer those slippery bastards. The cavern people seem to hunt using a mix of scent and echolocation. They echolocate using a series of similar, yet quite distinct clicks. Whereas the language clicks have more of a variable rhythm and tone, the hunting clicks seem to be consistent in speed and pitch. Upon dissection of the parts of the corpse that we did not eat, it was revealed that the smell and hearing centers of this creature's brain were exceptionally large compared to that of a human's. Examination of its sinuses and facial structure suggests an olfactory system more similar to a bloodhound than that of a man. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't they smell Mr. Grey if they have such good noses? And it's probably because their supreme sniffers in question were overwhelmed with the scent of iron and McDonald's in that fat guy's blood. Despite some of their more animalistic and brutal actions, the people of the cavern are actually quite intelligent. So much so that they've mastered tool use and discovered fire. Whether or not they did this independently or copied off the humans' homework is unknown. The pictograph that they paint around the cave and on the hills of Death Valley at night show an understanding of symbolism and a capacity for abstract thought. Their clicking language alone suggests a complex and intelligent brain. I mean, that one joined the pyramid scheme, so they're not all geniuses, but you know, there's a wide range just like humans. The most obvious identifier of the cavern people's intelligence are their religious practices, demonstrated by former investigator, professional spelunker, and current probable corpse, Richard Gray, and his notation of their ritualistic consumption of human beings who find themselves in the cave. It appears that the cave people consume the majority of the vital organs of the individual, but leave the rest of the flesh intact, save for carving the limbs in such a manner that they effectively look as though they've become doubled. The cave people probably used to just wait for people to go into the cave to get ritualistically eaten, but due to the annexation of the cave, they likely now just abduct humans under the cover of darkness. So just like a lot of the times that humans try to fix shit, they inevitably just made it worse, and the main people it's affecting are people who had nothing to do with the decision at all, and disagreed with it in the first place. And they all lived happily ever after. The end. Usually when people say the Devil's Hole, they're talking about the anus. Nah, I doubt it.
They were engineered to be perfectly legally distinct.
Besides, they got way better knockoffs to take care of before they come after this shit show. So, if you're watching this, sue Rick and Morty first. A series of disappearances has been traced to a religious cult in an undisclosed location. At first, these seem to be your standard run-of-the-mill ritualistic human sacrifices led by a charismatic sociopath with a man bun. However, certain aspects of the tragedies led authorities to believe that there was an occult motive behind them. Each of the victims were found completely skinned, with chunks of their flesh missing all over their body, flanked with what resembled human bite marks. The eyes were removed as well, leaving the sockets empty. Under the body was an insignia of a skull, drawn in the blood of the victim. While this seems like your everyday Manson affair, this isn't the standard run-of-the-mill cult wasting some innocent rando for a nonsense ethereal gabagool that doesn't actually exist. Just the opposite. Evidence seemed to suggest legitimate intervention from an anomalous entity. Multiple images of a skinned humanoid were taken at and within a 1-mile radius of many of the crime scenes, giving us a semblance of what this monster could be. This entity appears to be a humanoid being with a skeletal facial structure, muscular build, and no skin. The outer layer of its body is made up of only muscle fibers. From my very legitimate research, human beings don't survive for very long without their skin. So this must be some sort of paranormal being. I feel like I know that guy from somewhere. The most recent murder led to the discovery of a blood trail from the crime scene into a subway station, onto the tracks, and disappearing within the darkness of the tunnel. Because the blood streak disappeared suddenly at a dead end, some researchers theorized that this entity was using an alternate dimension known as the underbelly to stay hidden and travel between his crime scenes. And by some researchers, I mean me. The underbelly is an endless liminal space made up of underground structures like sewers, subways, and catacombs that has many connections to Earth via the non-anomalous versions of those places. People often find themselves transported there by exploring a bit too deeply underground and losing track of where they are. While human wanderers are almost never able to jump back and forth between dimensions without anomalous intervention, it appears that whatever this entity is using the underbelly as a base of operations, and breaching into the surface dimension routinely to interact with this cult. After tracking the murders for an extended period of time, a high-status member of the cult was captured by the Bureau of Anomalous Containment. After researcher Dr. Volt subjected them to advanced interrogation tactics, she was able to reveal that the goal of these ritualistic sacrifices was to bring about the end times. When she pressed the member to explain what he meant by end times, he had genuinely no fucking idea in the slightest, but he was able to point her towards the source of his knowledge: a book, bound with human leather and written in blood. Cliché as that may be, this tome contained information describing the manner in which the cult sacrificed the victims. First, they strap the victim down and make a large incision from the top of the forehead to the belly button. Then, they leave a trail of the victim's blood from the sacrifice altar to the nearest underground structure. They would then wait for the entity to arrive. Upon arrival of the skinned man, they would remove the epidermis of the victim while they were still alive and present the offering. The skinned man would then proceed to take bites out of the victim until their heart no longer beats, at which point it will take their eyes and then recede into the sewers. This process must be repeated until the entity has enough power to usher in the end times. The Bureau of Anomalous Containment has labeled this entity and the associated cult as a high-level threat to the integrity of the human species, and has subsequently put out a contain order for the entity and a terminate on-site order for members of the cult. Can't have anything nice without the government taking a big old slice of the pie, can you? To give a big middle finger to the BAC, I thought I'd come in and do their job for them. Wait, it's you? Good to know. Why were you, using the shit tunnels? Ooh, I'm gonna put these on a pair of boots. A novel species of gargantuan predatory salamander was recently discovered in an underground body of water in the Devil's Hole cave system. As an adult, the average length of this creature from nose to tip of the tail is around 12 feet or 3.65 meters. This is roughly the same size as the American alligator. This salamander was first discovered by an investigator of the Devil's Hole, sent by the company in charge of monitoring the cave's activity, Luci Corp. This salamander, hereby dubbed the Slime Dragon, was first documented when an explorer of the cave set up motion-activated flash cameras in and around one of the subterranean rivers. The first image that was delivered back to Luci Corp HQ was the face of the Slime Dragon. The second was the creature generously demonstrating its feeding habits on the explorer in question. Evidently, the investigator explored the bowels of the cave before exploring the bowels of the salamander. This animal is closely related to the pet store variety axolotl, and its physiology is incredibly similar despite a few key differences. One of these key differences is that it's fucking giant. Another key difference is that this creature is completely blind, and its eyes have become vestigial over thousands of years of not being used in the pitch-black environment of the cave. Now they just got the same milky white eyes as your friend's really old dog that they insist is still breathing, but you're not so sure. Instead of hunting using its eyesight, this animal detects prey using the movements of the water currents, similar to many crocodilians. If one is in the same water as a slime dragon, it would help to keep as still as possible, as any ripples you create in the water will lead it straight to you. It's like a deadly game of Marco Polo! The creature has incredibly sensitive skin that it partially breathes through, but this same sensitivity helps the slime dragon locate its prey with great efficiency, all without needing eyeballs. While this sensitive skin is not very protective and can be easily damaged, this is counterbalanced because another trait that the animal shares with the axolotl is the ability to regrow entire limbs and sections of their body or skin. The Devil's Hole slime dragon has also developed electromagnetic sensors on its lower jaw to help it detect the electric biosignatures left in the environment by living animals, making it all the more effective at hunting. All without the use of sight. Alright, now you're rubbing it in. As a child, this creature is quite similar to a regular axolotl. It's actually indistinguishable from regular ones, save for the fact that it has developed sharp teeth and a much more advanced predation strategy. As a baby, it's the size of an adult regular axolotl, and as it grows, it feeds on larger and larger prey. Another key difference between this giant man-eating axolotl and a regular one is what happens when it goes through puberty. While most amphibians eventually metamorphose, trade their gills for lungs, and move out of the fully aquatic lifestyle, this is not the case for axolotls. They instead retain the gills and stay entirely aquatic in a condition known as paedomorphism. Ew. Hashtag axolotl is over party. This is not the case for the Devil's Hole slime dragon, because it likes consenting adults, like people who don't get stabbed to death in prison. And while it does retain its gills and the ability to breathe water, it will also grow lungs, like in most other amphibian metamorphosis, allowing it to easily traverse land and water. Once Luci Corp was made aware of the slime dragon's existence, they sent a team of biologists into the cave in attempts to capture one of the babies. For once, this went off without a hitch, and the biologists returned shortly after, strangely with no note of anomalous interference whatsoever. The team did note that they found a small pool of water completely filled to the brim with baby slime dragons. Almost immediately. They didn't even have to look. It was the first thing they saw dead center of the first cavern. That's not suspicious. Strangely enough, the small pool wasn't being fed by any other larger body of water. It was just there, in isolation. The team gathered 15 of the babies and brought them back to headquarters for study. Because the slime dragons are completely blind, they adapted quite well to captivity. The animals didn't have any obvious anomalous features, and to all external measures, seemed to be just a larger, more dangerous cousin to the axolotl. It's entirely possible that this creature evolved from its smaller, benign pet store cousin, whether it be related to the anomalous cave or not. Noting that these creatures could be contained and cared for just about as easily as alligators, Luci Corp decided to keep them on display in attempts to show the public that they totally had a safe level of control over the anomalies related to the cave, and should be trusted to put a Disneyland-style resort inside of the literal pit of hell. If dragging a big slimy cum-covered lizard out of the ground doesn't show they got this handled, what will? Obvious foreshadowing is obvious. Did you know that axolotls are illegal to own in the state where I live, which makes me want one so much more now? The underbelly. A strange world made up of seemingly endless tunnels and pipelines from the hidden systems that keep the human world turning. Railways, sewage, catacombs, any structure created to facilitate the incessant function or store the forgotten waste of a society that carries on unknowingly above it. The entrance to this place isn't easily found, at least not by choice, as most of the wanderers who find themselves unfortunate enough to end up in the underbelly do it by mistake. They stick their nose where it doesn't belong and voyage a bit too deep underground on an unfamiliar path. It won't be obvious that they're in a new place right away, but most realize they've transitioned into the underbelly as the architecture begins to resemble a brutal industrialist Dr. Seuss book. The creatures that live down here tend to be much stranger than anything you'd find on the surface as well. One such creature, the one we're discussing today, is the chudfly. Chudfly are a humanoid species of insect that inhabits the underbelly. As do many creatures that live in this realm, this animal includes refuse and biological waste as staples in its diet, bringing a whole new meaning to the term shit-eating grin. However, also like most all life down here, the chudfly isn't picky, and has shown predatory strategies when given the opportunity. Like a regular housefly, this entity eats by vomiting up a corrosive acidic substance onto its food, and slurping up the resulting meat mush.
Nature is just so beautiful sometimes. I mean, not right now. This makes me want to replace the Great Lakes with Mountain Dew and watch the fish freak the fuck out. But I don't know, sit on a sapling.
This method of eating is incredibly useful for digesting the various ingredients of shit, but sometimes makes it difficult for the chudfly to subdue more active prey, since it's kind of a sit-and-wait situation. Although, the insect has demonstrated a form of ranged spittle attack, and has been known to stalk victims for extended periods of time while the acid eats away at them. While parts of its facial structure have grown to resemble a human skull, DNA testing has revealed that this is seemingly from convergent evolution rather than shared ancestry. In fact, the structures that look like the skull aren't even bone at all, and are instead made up of the same chitin as the rest of the creature's exoskeleton. Some researchers theorize that the skull appearance to the chudfly's face is a method of fooling the facial pattern recognition systems of human brains. It's thought that in the low light levels of the underbelly, the similar anatomical structures could cause a human wanderer to approach the chudfly to look for help. Just remember, if you see something that looks friendly, everything down here wants to kill you. So, same rules as Australia. While the chudfly does have wings, they're shriveled and vestigial like your penis, making them useless in terms of what it was once designed for. Similar to a housefly, this creature has compound eyes. Each receptor is a tiny eye in itself, which captures its own image, and the sensory information is converted into a larger, singular image. While these eyes have low image resolution compared to yours, they possess an exceptionally large view angle and the ability to detect rapid movement and the polarization of light. This is much more useful to the chudfly in this low light environment than the regular eyeball setup. Also, like regular houseflies, they have 3 larval stages. Unlike regular houseflies, the 3 larval stages are radically different from one another. First, an adult chudfly will lay fertilized eggs in rotting meat, and after a few days, the eggs will hatch into burrito-sized maggots. These burrito maggots will eat whatever dead thing they were laid inside of to gather enough biomass in order to metamorphose to their next stage. The next stage, the nymph stage, is similar in anatomy to a dragonfly nymph, only much larger. At this point, the chudfly nymph is around the size of an adult German shepherd. It shifts from scavenger feeding habits to predatory ones, as it skulks both the water and walkways of the underbelly in search for prey. The chudfly nymph will basically eat anything it can fit in its mouth. So, if you're traveling with small children, keep a close eye on them. Or the chudfly nymph will keep a close mouth on them. Wait, don't tweet yet, I didn't mean like that! While it cannot fit an adult human wanderer into its gullet, it will still attempt to subdue them in order to drag their bodies to a more private place for later consumption. After it consumes enough food to metamorphose again, it will begin the final metamorphosis stage, in which it forms a pupa, and after a period of around 2 weeks to a month, it emerges as a fully grown chudfly. As an adult chudfly, the insect will live for about a year before finding a mate, how the fuck does he have more riz than me, and starting the cycle all over again by laying eggs in another freshly made dead body. And they all lived happily ever after, unless they happen to be the guy who got the eggs laid in him. The end. The Death Valley National Park has become a flashpoint for anomalous activity. These phenomena are centered around the Devil's Hole cave system. Among the happenings, there are reports of shifting geography within the cavern, reality distortions, and even an otherworldly ecosystem of confounding creatures. Several investigators have been assigned to find the source of these anomalies, but most of them have gone missing. The ones who do come back report further implausible sightings and show symptoms of insanity. Nevertheless, people not only continued to visit the cave, but tourism increased. In an attempt to decrease the number of people going missing, the independent company Luci Corp took over expeditions to the cave and closed it to the public until it could be better understood and made safe for civilian activity. Oftentimes, the best encouragement you can give a human being to go somewhere is a big red sign that says "Do not enter." Emilio Cruz and Cal Crookshank were no exception. After several years of becoming increasingly obsessed with the place following a series of online videos discussing the anomalies, Emilio convinced his college roommate Cal to check it out with him. Cal was always dismissive of anomalous phenomena, thinking the whole thing was a hoax. He figured that it was shut to the public anyways, and maybe if he went, Emilio would finally shut up about it for good. So, Cal agreed, and Emilio led them to the caves. The two of them managed to sneak past what little fortifications that Luci Corp labeled security with ease. That's the last time either of them was heard from, until Emilio showed up at a police station 400 miles from the Devil's Hole. His family reported him going missing a month ago, but he swore he was only in the cave a couple days at most. Emilio's eyewitness description is as follows.
I figured we'd be fine. I did all the research. I thought the biggest thing to fear was a rock falling on my head. Cal was more scared of running out of water. We forgot about those concerns real quick though. Things seemed fine for the first few minutes, until we reached a dead end. We turned around to go back, but suddenly our path was stopped by a thick wall of glass in a blinding fractal pattern. It got closer to us, trapping us between it and the dead end as its pattern spread across the cave walls. Cal was panicking and cursing me for bringing him, but I managed to convince him to charge the encroaching fractal. Right before it crushed us, we grabbed onto each other and rushed. We broke through the thin glass wall. The part of the cave we were in looked nothing like it did before. The dead end was gone, and instead, we were in the middle of an intersection. We had 4 ways to go, but they all looked like the same endless path, except for the walls. In 3 directions, the cave walls moved like a wave. The 4th hallway, the one we went down, had smooth walls with perfect corners. They were still cave walls, but it felt like smooth, like someone built it. And it was lit like there were torches, but I didn't see any. The only reminder of where we were was the stalactites, arranged on the ceiling in perfect rows. Water dripped down them, creating tiny pools, shallow enough to see our reflections.
They seemed to shimmer under the invisible torchlight. As we walked, we tried to avoid the puddles, but eventually, Cal stepped in one. Rather than cause a splash, he fell straight through. He was fully submerged before I even knew what was going on. I ran to the water and stuck my head in to see if I could find him, but I quickly realized these were more than just some puddles. Underneath the surface, they were connected by an unfathomably deep body of water. There were some elevated ledges on the sides of the cave, but at some points I couldn't see the bottom. The surface of the ledges were filled with bones. Some human, some I didn't recognize. In the middle of the lake was Cal, struggling to find his way out for a breath of air. I tried to shout at him. I just choked on the water. As he floated there, one of those little tiny pupfish swam up to him. I had no idea those things lived so deep. Cal looked it in the eye. He seemed to find some calmness in that moment. That was until the tiny blue fish opened its mouth, showing off layers of sharp teeth so bright I could make out every single one of them. Thousands of pairs of eyes opened on the sides of the cave. More pupfish than I could count raced out of the tiny nooks in the rocks. Cal tried to swim up, looking for the way out. He finally spotted me, but before he had the chance, a dozen pupfish bit down on his ankles. He let out a muffled scream as the fish dragged him down, his eyes bulging from the pressure. I saw a couple pupfish eyeing me, hoping I would try to save him. It was hopeless. Once they had him pinned at the bottom, the rest of the fish pounced. They devoured him. They left his neck and head alone at first, as if they wanted him to experience every moment of it. Within moments, Cal was picked clean, and the pieces of his skeleton drifted apart before settling amongst the other corpses. When they were done, the pupfish turned towards me and rushed the surface. My head shot out of the water, and I started sprinting before I even knew what was in front of me. I turned to see the mouth of the cave, just a few feet away where before there was an endless hallway. It was as if something was letting me out. I emerged in a totally different part of the valley from where I wandered. Thankfully, Cal made me bring enough water to last until I found my way back to town. I don't know what I experienced, but fuck those fish. Pupfish endangered my ass.
Endanger your ass? Don't mind if I do. Maybe next time a company called Luci Corp tells you not to go somewhere, don't. You know the phrase, curiosity killed the cat? Yeah, I've met your cats. They would have turned around. You fuckers are the one dying from curiosity. So let's talk about these fish so you idiots can go look for them. Emilio described them as pupfish. Devil's Hole pupfish are little bright blue fish, found only in the waters of the Devil's Hole cave. Until now, their numbers have never been recorded at more than 500 individuals. But Emilio reported seeing thousands of these little guys, with notably different physiology than their commonly reported surface counterparts. Pupfish are known for their ability to live in low oxygen environments, so that's likely how they were able to sustain such a massive population much deeper within the Devil's Hole. Whatever the hell ate Cal certainly wasn't the harmless herbivorous pupfish we're familiar with, though. To make things easier, I'm gonna call the larger carnivorous pupfish a wolfish. I know that wolfish already exist, and it's confusing, but scientists can't name things for shit anyway. So why should I have to be the one that has to change? Wolfish hunt in a pack, much like piranha and wolves. Also like piranha, they tear their victims apart with admirable efficiency, leaving behind only bones, or to use the scientific term, dog toys. These fish are not only fearsome, but the underground body of water they inhabit seems to be anomalous. From above, the entrances to the lake look only like puddles, but this is actually due to the light that emanates from the caverns above the lake. This light reflects off the top of the lake in a manner where it makes the water look only inches deep, when in reality it's connected to a deep lake with a violent riptide that quickly sucks the victim into the center. No one knows exactly where the light comes from, but it seems to emanate somewhere from within the cave walls. Sometimes victims would step in on their own, but it seems as though the wolfish are aware of how cute they look, and they use it to lure humans, both to touch the puddle and to their doom. Just look at this old guy. How could anyone suspect what he is planning? That's when they get you. The first drop of blood in the water summons a horde of fellow wolffish, who chomp up your fleshy bits, like, well, wolves, or fish. I don't know. My favorite part about the endangered pupfish is how they taste when I eat them.
The underbelly. An endless liminal expanse of tunnels and pipes that belong to the underground systems that keep society functioning. Subways, catacombs, sewers, any structure created to deal with the waste of society and keep it moving. Few know exactly how to enter the underbelly. In fact, most of who find themselves there do so by accident. All it takes is to take a wrong turn, poking your nose where it doesn't belong below ground. One fast food executive, however, found himself in the underbelly searching for answers. There are many questions that may never have an answer. What's the meaning of life? Is there life after death? How many licks does it take to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop? Among those unanswerable questions was one that stood above the rest. One so shrouded in mystery that among every scholar and philosopher who came across it, none left with an appropriate response. Who the fuck actually eats at Long John Silver's? Even the absolute shittiest restaurants infect the one person willing to give them a shot with food poisoning every once in a while. This exec had never seen a single person enter one, so how the hell was he getting paid? Was Long John Silver's just one big money laundering operation? And if so, where was the money really coming from? He began to have trouble sleeping at night, with images of crack kingpins, human trafficking, and hamster prostitution. He needed to know. Looking to the internet for answers as his chronically online ass often did, he saw he was not the only one wondering this. He was looking for someone claiming to have eaten at the restaurant of his employment, but all he saw was more people looking for people claiming to have eaten there. He was at a dead end. In attempts to explain how they survive as a business, the executive at LJS searched everywhere for a possible market of where they got their customers. While watching the iconic LJS Dr. Norman Big Fish commercial, it finally hit him. What if people aren't what's eating there? Long John Silver's is a fish restaurant. Yes, that means it serves fish, but that's not all it means. If they couldn't find someone willing to eat at Long John Silver's, they must have found something willing to eat at Long John Silver's. The executive was looking in the wrong place. When your food comes from the water, why look to land for customers? He thought back to a local urban legend, a fishman who was rumored to live in the sewers, feeding on the refuse of the modern world.
Sounds like a guy who'd enjoy some Long John Silver's.
Half man, half fish, with a palate perfectly suited to what the LJS Corporation advertises as food. After taking 17 tabs of acid and watching The Shape of Water in reverse, the executive knew what had to be done. He had to find their actual customers. If there was a place where this beautiful hybrid creature could live and still have access to Long John Silver's, it must have been the sewers. The executive packed a go bag and entered the first manhole he could find. He wasn't well acquainted with the confusing underground structures, so he slipped into the underbelly quite quickly. He hadn't even noticed any of the Lovecraftian changes to the infrastructure, or even some of the peculiar creatures hiding in the shadows. He was a man on a mission. He laid a Long John Silver's fish sandwich combo on the side of one of the fecal-tainted rivers, and waited, and waited, and waited. After a few hours, he dozed off. He awoke to the sound of squelching water and crumpling food wrappers. As he opened his eyes, he was face to face with something inhuman. Half man, half fish, just as the legends described. Even more shocking, it was somehow eating the Long John Silver's sandwich like it was food. The fishman's gaze was fixed on the sandwich and fries combo, but as the jaw of the executive dropped, they locked eyes. The fishman hesitantly pointed directly at the LJS shirt that the exec always wore under every other clothing item he owned. It must have recognized the symbol from the packaging. It started squeaking a strange chant from its gills before more and more fish people gathered around it. The executive emptied his backpack, filling the space in front of him with Long John Silver's. The fishmen shrieked in rejoice, leapt to the walkway, and devoured everything the executive had to give them. When they were finished, they all made eye contact with him, and the one in the front extended their hand. The executive took it, and before he knew what was happening, they were whisking him through the shitwater. In moments, he was at what looked like their home, a clearing in the sewer, littered with LJS wrappers. As the fishman moved and bustled about their activities, he got a closer look at them. They had smooth, slippery skin, sharp teeth, bulbous eyes, and a body that looked exactly like what would happen if a fish person were to survive solely on Long John Silver's.
Atop this fat neck is a face similar to an anglerfish, with the same sort of flapdoodle that the angler uses to hunt. Instead, they use it to see and carry out tasks that need light. Some were reading, some were writing, some were painting. I mean, everything that they can paint is made with shit, so it's all greens and browns, and they go to this really unhealthy guy's pipes to get red, but still pretty cool. Better than you can paint. The LJS Corporation was able to survive for so long with not even a single human customer because they were supporting an entire fish society. Then, he looked up. He felt like he recognized where he was. The lead fishman again took his hand and led him to a waterfall, where the executive claimed without prompting that they definitely didn't have sex. And then the fishman took him up the waterfall. They went a long, long way. He couldn't breathe and struggled to get free, but the fishman held on. At some point, he went unconscious due to lack of oxygen. He awoke, soaking wet and completely naked, in the very same Long John Silver's he had gotten the sandwiches from. And that, my friends, is where I've been, and my idea for the future of this company. Also, I didn't have sex with the fishman, if anyone was wondering.
Dave, you haven't been back to work in 2 weeks, and you come back covered in human shit, insult the entire company, and interrupt my meeting to scream about fish people? That took a lot of guts. I think you just might have what it takes to be partner material. Anyone else have some radical new ideas like my main man Dave here?
Maybe it would be easier to rebrand or change the menu.
Anyone else trying to crush my childlike wonder?
How do fish people get money?
My favorite type of comment is the person who completely misses the point of this being a horror story and tries to disprove whatever obviously fake crap that I just made up. Like, they're so far removed that they think they're the smartest person ever, and they think they've figured it all out. It's like amazing. Man is studying ants on the ground while the joke goes over his head. To those people I say, no one has ever been inside a Long John Silver's, so they can't prove it's not full of fish people. Hey, so now that we've seen the critters, before the finale, which one do you think would be the best to see fight? Who do you think wins? Which one would you eat? Yeah, me too. I feel like it would taste like a cowtopus. Look, I'm not playing Smash or Pass anymore unless I go broke.
The Death Valley National Park has become a hotspot for anomalous activity. Among the discovered happenings, there have been reports of shifting geography within the cave, reality distortions, and even an entirely separate ecosystem of otherworldly creatures. Several investigators have been assigned to find the source of these anomalies, but most of them have gone missing on their expeditions. Consumed by the cave, never to return. Or so it was thought. Mr. Richard Gray was among the first of the investigators to enter the cave. He had one successful expedition in which he documented the religious practices of the humanoid race of the people of the cavern before being chased out. Despite his protests, Mr. Gray was sent in for a second investigation of the cave system and did not return. After several subsequent investigators had been lost to the cavern, Mr. Gray emerged from the cave, looking notably unkempt and malnourished. He displayed many telltale signs of insanity, showing a wide range of intense emotion in only a short time, and having numerous violent outbursts during the time being interviewed. In the first 2 hours, he would occasionally grant his interviewer interesting responses amongst the outbursts of hysterical ramblings, violent threats, and sewer slide all ideations, to use the monetizable pronunciation. Among the information Mr. Gray provided to the staff, many of the things he stated were particularly concerning. Mr. Gray seemed to know the names of every subsequent investigator that entered the cave, despite being missing for the time of their recruitment and deployment. He even claimed to know what happened to each of them, claiming numerous horrors, each more fantastical and ridiculous than the last, were responsible for their disappearance or demise. The second parts of these statements could not be verified. However, he described the process of each of their deployment down to the unique instructions that they were given. Mr. Gray, despite his clear insanity, was reporting factual information that he had no possible way of knowing. While there was a full 3-hour recording and written transcription of the interview, all evidence was destroyed in the process. The information left is from the interviewer's memory. Mr. Gray claimed that not all of them were dead, but that they weren't coming back. As he put it, They now belonged to her. He also began referring to the cave as its own entity, saying she doesn't want you to send anyone else in. Mr. Gray listed every agent's name and assignment correctly, down to the exact instructions. He also had encyclopedic knowledge of the cave's ecosystem. The investigator listed giant fish monsters, a room that turns any organism who ventures into it into a statue, a spider with human biology, creatures that are legally distinct from the ones from The Descent, and caverns that lead to pits that are literally bottomless. The final statement that Mr. Gray made was that the cave was alive. After this statement, Mr. Gray went completely silent for a moment before he began screaming. The screaming looked as if it were not caused by anger or madness, but instead a terrible pain. His lips then shut, and his cheeks puffed out as his stomach made a gurgling noise and his mouth filled with liquid. Mr. Gray then projectile vomited a stream of what appeared to be blood directly into the investigator's open mouth. The investigator vacated the room in panic and disgust, puking onto the floor of the waiting room. Upon re-entry to the investigation room, despite formerly being strapped to a chair with leather binds, Mr. Gray was gone. He was only alone in the room for 10 minutes, and upon hearing a loud bang, the investigator entered to see he had not only ripped through his restraints, but had dug through the concrete floor and escaped. He had destroyed the recording device, and all of the notes taken were missing. He had left a trail of flesh, and all 10 of his bloody fingernails were ripped and strewn about in the dirt. There was a trail of sloppily painted symbols written in blood, all the way back to the mouth of the Devil's Hole. While these symbols were hastily created, it was unmistakably the same cultish iconography painted around Death Valley and in the Devil's Hole. The interviewer was instructed to transcribe everything he could remember, but was quickly overtaken by what looked to be the same symptoms of madness as Mr. Gray, and began attacking those around him before sprinting towards the cave. Security on site was ordered to dispatch him, and he was terminated with a headshot. The CEO of Luci Corp has promised to begin efforts to dismantle the Devil's Hole tourism infrastructure program, in hopes that none of the lives lost to the cavern will be in vain.
Come one, come all, to the grand opening of the Devil's Hole Nature Preserve, where you and the whole family can experience things God never intended. Explore the constantly changing cavern maze, meet fun locals, and enjoy our state-of-the-art zoo. Order on the app and receive 2 free children's tickets to the Slime Dragon Lazy River. Luci Corp is not responsible for any damages to the property, persons, or sanity sustained while visiting the Devil's Hole Nature Preserve.
If you like this video and want to see more, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe with all notifications enabled, or I'll feed you to the cave, which, now that I know it's a she, you know. I mean, I don't, but maybe you do. I want to thank Dead Rex for drawing all these spooky critters. I'd like to thank Biodegradable for editing this video. They're a great editor, and you should go watch all of their things. Shout out the Inner Circle. Love y'all.